Hello everybody and welcome to English in the Afternoon. Today's lesson is about the past perfect progressive. The structure of the past perfect progressive is very similar to the structure of the present perfect progressive. Basically, when making a sentence in this tense, we need to have three elements. We need to use had, then been, then the verb ending in ing. So a sentence would look like this. They had been looking for a new house. It had been snowing for 3 days. Susan had been studying German 3 years before she got a job there. The professor had been working on a new weapon when he disappeared. Here we have the subject, then had, then been, then followed by the verb ing, looking, snowing, studying, working. Also, we need to remember that just like any progressive tense, there are some verbs that we cannot use that end with ing. For instance, we can never say I had been loving, or I had been knowing, or I had been understanding. For a full list of these verbs, you can visit a video on the present progressive. In the negative form, we need to place not between had and the verb. So the first sentence, they had been looking for a new house, would be they had not been looking for a new house. And it had been snowing for 3 days would be it had not been snowing for 3 days. And as a question, we just need to switch the subject and had. So a question in this tense will look like this. Had Brazil been working on a new energy source? Or had you been practicing the piano? Okay, let's see what all this means. But before we do that, let's briefly cover how the present perfect progressive works and then compare it to the past perfect progressive. Let's imagine that this line represents time. This one here is the present moment, here is the past, and here is the future. In the present perfect progressive, we said that it means that an action started in the past and has been going on until now. For instance, if we said, I have been studying for the test before you came, it would mean that I started studying at some point in the past, let's say here, and from that moment until right now, I have not stopped. In fact, I only stopped studying because you came and interrupted me. Now, in the past perfect progressive, this sentence would be, I had been studying for the test before you came. In this case, it would mean that I started studying for the test at some point in the past, and I had been studying nonstop until some other point in the past. In other words, the entire action is in the past tense this time. It has nothing to do with the present anymore. We use the past perfect progressive to explain what we were doing when something else happened to interrupt us. A couple more. She had been cleaning her room when she heard the news. It means that she heard the news here at some point in the past, but before she heard the news, she was in the middle of cleaning her room. Or it had been raining when I heard the accident. Again, the accident happened here, but before the accident happened, it was raining nonstop. Let's compare the past perfect progressive to the past progressive for a moment. For instance, let's look at these two sentences. We were traveling for 3 days, and we had been traveling for 3 days. When we say it in the past progressive, we were traveling for 3 days, it means that we are describing a situation that was happening over a period of 3 days, a situation in the past that was taking place over a long period of time. However, when we use the past perfect progressive, we had been traveling for 3 days, we are expecting to explain how this action, which had not stopped, was interrupted by something. In other words, we are explaining how our travels that lasted for 3 days were connected to some event that affected that travel. For instance, we want to explain that we finally reached some important destination, as in, we had been traveling for 3 days before we reached Machu Picchu. Or maybe we want to explain why we had to stop our trip suddenly. We had been traveling for 3 days before John broke his leg. When we compare the past perfect progressive to the past perfect, we see that the difference is whether the action stopped or if the action had still been going on. For instance, if we have these two sentences, Bob had been driving all night and Bob had driven all night. In the first one, we are simply explaining that at some night in the past, Bob was driving without stopping. We want to focus on the length of the action before a point in the past. In other words, the process of driving is what is important here. Maybe Bob had an accident that night, and in order to explain the reason he had the accident, we need to say that he had been driving all night. However, when we say Bob had driven all night, we are just saying that Bob finished this action in the past and it was important because of some other action in the past. Maybe Bob was supposed to make some difficult delivery 2 days ago, and in order to explain how difficult it was, we say he had driven all night. In other words, we are not interested about what was happening during this trip, but we are more interested in the result of the trip. All right, let's do some practice. Things are going to get a little bit more difficult here. Complete each of these following sentences in either the past perfect progressive, the past progressive, or the past perfect. I'll give you a minute. You can pause the video here. Okay, let's take them up together. Number 1, I didn't sleep at all. The baby was crying all night. Number 2, last week, Grace made an amazing pizza. Obviously, she had watched many YouTube videos. Number 3, what were you doing at 6 p.m. last night? Number 4, I didn't go out all day, but I know that it had been raining because the grass was still wet. Number 5, when I saw her, she was very tired. She had been running after the bus. Number 6, Stan was crossing the road when the accident happened. Number 7, I was sad when the bookstore closed. I had been going there since I was 10. Number 8, I found Jane playing computer games. She was not studying. Number 9, he came to pick me up at 9 p.m. I had been waiting for over 30 minutes. Number 10, she had not finished her homework before the test began.